commence within the prelude of what cannot be merely the circumferential logic of being, we must interrogate the unuttered oscillation between the prepositional and the supra-essential, that is, the negation of negation, not as an annulment, but as a hypertelic eruption. If, in the most destitute locus of pre-theoretical orientation, one still presumes the intelligibility of the ontophenomenal structure, this presumption must itself be subjected to the very dialectical disintegration that would obliterate its own conditionality. We do not commence with the given, for the given is a symptom of a precluded transcendentality, a precluded transcendentality that is neither prior nor posterior, but resides in a suspended auto-libration within the unarticulable. Thus, let us disassemble the inaugural failure of the metaphysical tradition, its enthrallment to the tautology of the determinate. To conceptualize determination as an act of limitation is to operate within the paralytic horizon of epistemic submission, for determination, when unshackled from the dialectical repression imposed upon it, reveals itself as an autophagic dynamism. The para-ontological libration I propose is neither the negation nor the affirmation of being, but rather the moment wherein being reconstitutes itself through its own illusion. Here negation ceases to be a simple negation, but an excess negation, an over-negation that does not merely refute, but in its refutation, posits the irreducibility of that which it negates. To elucidate this with greater complexity, we must contend with the hypostasis of the pre-intelligible. It is not sufficient to postulate the absolute as the in itself, for the in itself is only conceivable in relation to its negated other. The absolute cannot be that which is posited in distinction from the relative, for this positing itself renders the absolute relationally ensnared. Instead, we must recognize the absolute as the excessive transgression of all relationality, not as pure indeterminacy, but as hyper-determinacy, wherein determination proliferates beyond its own structural confines. The notion of dialectical resolution presupposes that the fissure of negation results in a synthesis. However, what is rarely apprehended is that synthesis itself is an illusion generated by the structural dependency of the concept upon its own obliteration. To synthesize is not to resolve but to exteriorize the necessity of self-negation as the principle of autogenesis. This, however, must not be confused with a mere repetition of the Hegelian Aufhebung, for the Aufhebung retains a covert subservience to the intelligible. Rather, the non-manifest infinitude that I speak of emerges from the very failure of synthesis, itself to contain the transgressive proliferations of being's own indigestibility. One may, with a limited horizon of conceptual apprehension, seek recourse to the postulate of self-coincidence. But self-coincidence is the most insidious fallacy, for to coincide with oneself is to presuppose a stability of the self that cannot be granted without epistemic violence. In truth, every form of self-relation is a subterfuge, an auto-evacuation that manifests its own impossibility precisely in the moment of its proclamation. Self-coincidence is not a phenomenon, but a retroactive construction fabricated within the illusory edifice of conceptual reconciliation. The real moment of self-relation is the moment of self-excess, the moment in which the self ceases to be itself and instead erupts into an alien exteriority that cannot be recuperated within the logic of the same. The para-ontological libration is therefore the movement of being beyond its own recognizability. To recognize being as being is already to fail to grasp it, for recognition is always an act of reification. The true structure of being is not that of a stable foundation, but of an anti-foundational excess, a ceaseless supersession that does not lead towards completion, but towards an absolute instability. The moment of true apprehension is not the moment of synthesis, but of dissolution, not the moment of reconciliation, but of catastrophic divergence, wherein the very terms of conceptuality unravel in the wake of their own uncontainable proliferation. Thus we conclude, or rather we refuse to conclude, by gesturing towards the indeterminable unfinalizability of this trajectory. To conceive of a terminus would be to reinstate the tyranny of finality. But the para-ontological libration admits no terminal point. It is an eternal suspension, a recursive volatilization, wherein every conceptual articulation folds back upon itself only to exceed its own limitation. It is not that the truth lies beyond, but that truth itself is a function of its own perpetual escape. In this sense, philosophy is not the apprehension of the real, but the eruption of the real beyond its own apprehensibility.